Well, again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Options for Senior Living is just always proud to do these education events and webinars, and so we're grateful for your time and joining us. We want to get started on time and keep to our time frame. And I just want to thank my guest, Jason May, attorney Jason May, for joining us. And so, Jason, welcome to Options for Senior Living's webinar this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Well, we've got a couple things to cover. I want to just, I always start these conversations with kind of a what's going on in our world. And Jason, about, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we probably both got contacted at the same time by Presley Reeder of Comfort Care, right?
Yeah.
And had you been on their radio show at that time, their Aging in Arizona radio program?
Yeah, I'd been on a couple of times by that time, yes.
Okay. I had been a guest, and Presley approached me and approached some of us that had been guests on their radio show that they had been doing every week for some time, educating their listeners on multiple facets and industries and avenues that had to do with senior healthcare, senior living, senior resources. It's such a large, complicated world, isn't it, that we live in? And they had a request of their former guests, Jason and I being two of those, to contribute a chapter to a book project that they wanted to release to the community that was kind of a summary or a culmination of a lot of those contributions to the radio show. So Jason and myself authored a chapter contribution to a book that was finally released. It's been a project in the last 18 months. And I don't know about you, I would call Presley and go, how's it going? And what he would say, publishing a book was the hardest thing he'd ever done or something, Jason?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, each time the timeline kept on getting further out.
Well, the book finally got released about 45 days ago or so, Aging in Arizona. You can get that book on Amazon. It's $14.95 for paperback, $9.95 on the Kindle version. Aging in Arizona, Presley Reeder is the primary author, but our guest today, Jason, contributed a chapter to that. What were the things that you kind of touched on in your chapter, Jason?
Well, the area that they asked me to focus on, go through a number of different areas in the business, it was the ALTEX process, which is the Arizona Long-Term Care Program.
Okay. And that is a several-hour conversation with some people, isn't it?
It is an amazing program that helps cover people who do not have long-term care planning done.
Right.
But it is not as simple because guess what? It's made by the government. So
right.
There's layers and layers.
So in my experience, it's been best when families who can utilize the services of a good attorney like yourself to walk them through that. It's worth their investment because of so many areas to get tripped up in that process, right?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of misconceptions that are out there, even when you Google search and things that with proper planning, you can get an awful lot of benefit without having to necessarily be poverty stricken.
Right. And you can use that to protect a well spouse or to do some real precise estate planning for families.
Yes, that's the goal. The goal is always to try and meet people before it's the full-on emergency.
Right.
But you deal with them as they come in.
Right. When we get into a little deeper, I want to talk about maybe some specific cases and things that we can talk about. Is that okay? Can I come back to that in a few minutes?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. Hey, there was something I wanted to ask you as well. Oh, I'll bet you in that process, because Medicaid, our federal Medicaid program, supports the state with this ALTEX program. How many times do you answer the question, does it my Medicare or Medicaid, and they get the two confused? They get assuming that their Medicare also gets involved and covers their assisted living care or in-home care, right? But you have to straighten them out on that the government health insurance program doesn't cover those things.
Yep, it's like two different children from the same parents. Just because you have the same parents, they're not identical.
That's a great way to say. I love that. Can I borrow that? That's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I got three brothers that are nothing like me here, so that's awesome. That's pretty funny. So you guys were talking with Jason May. Jason's with G&M Legal Services, and it's really through this book that we both contributed to that Jason and I've gotten to know each other the last year, and excited to have you join us today. And we've titled today's program "The Best and Worst Cases: The Pitfalls of Estate Planning." And some of that, I guess, we'll get in, but we'll touch back on this all text program, Jason. But um, just as an overview, you want to share a thought about why this is so near and dear to your heart and why this is so important for people to know and understand?
Sure. Well, actually, I guess I can just go how I got into business in the first place was a family event. I had a grandmother. She was one of those type of grandmothers that everybody wanted to adopt her. She'd jump on her trampoline in the morning. She'd watch Bob Barker, and all the way up into her 90s, she lived on her own. And my family would go and spend a lot of time with her.
Right.
And she had her estate plan as essentially she'd kind of pat on the shoulder and say, you know what to do, Jason. You know what to do, Scott. And but she never actually wrote it down and have had it documented in proper estate planning. She kind of had called the 1890s estate plan.
Wow.
And then fast forward a little bit of time, she ended up developing, which what we didn't understand at the time was Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had what I lovingly call a contentious relative that showed up.
Yep.
And they had their plan, which was different than my grandmother's plan. And we ended up having to go to court. And my family wanted to they were the type of people that wanted to do the right thing and take care of and follow what grandma's wishes were. But because she didn't document it, it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And that then molded me into the direction that I knew I was supposed to go, which was trying to help people like my grandmother fulfill their wishes, goals, and dreams, and then also help people like my parents and protect them that
Right.
those people are trying to do the right thing, and but they're terrified of those contentious relatives that we all seem to have.
We all seem to have somebody in the family. You know, I can't tell you how many of the hundreds and hundreds of people I've met over the 15 years I've been in this senior living industries who have a similar personal story that triggered their engagement in what we do. And so I seem to keep finding us that have those stories, you know, and it's those people that like ourselves, Jason, that have that kind of heart and soul for the kind of work we do. This isn't for everybody, but for those of us that do this for a long-term career, it continually fuels us because there's no end to the number of people that need the kind of help you offer. So cool stuff. I was thinking about a family I helped a few years ago who the parents were regularly pushing back on the kids. The kids were trying to get into mom and dad's estate, just to make not I don't mean the estate in terms of having the finances, but to know what their wishes were and to make sure that their legal stuff was done. Of course, the family, the parents were like, no, we had this done years ago. It's all good. And of course, when they say that, that's what makes me the most fearful. And of course, what happened, you know, dad had a dementia that the wife was covering for. Dad got spooked one afternoon and wanted to leave the house. The wife got in the middle of it, tried to hold him from leaving the house, which when people with Alzheimer's get spooked or get revved in the afternoon, we call that sundowning. That can be a problem. They had a struggle at the door. He fell on top of her, broke her hip, and then he had a delirium response to that, Jason, and then he had to be hospitalized psychiatrically because of his delirium. Of course, the paperwork wasn't done yet, and now the kids are in guardian's court because there was contention between the brothers, of course, and mom hadn't expressed her wishes. She's hospitalized, and you can imagine the mess that happened after that, right?
That is all too common. And actually, if we want, we can flip on to the next section here and kind of start touching on some of those.
All right, let's do that. Can you see that? We'll talk about the legal documents that everybody should have and we should review, and talk about how long or how often they should be looked at and reviewed.
Absolutely. So what actually happened there? What it sounds like, which is very common. The chances are what happened was mom and dad had a healthcare power of attorney, and since they had gotten their documents done probably before Arizona split the powers of attorney, they didn't have a healthcare power of attorney. So the difference between the two, one focuses on, you go on over to Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith looks at you, taps you on the knee, and says, "Well, Scott, for your age, you're in pretty good health." That's a healthcare power of attorney.
Okay.
But when we come to Alzheimer's, dementia, bipolar, schizophrenia, any kind of cognitive or like mental deterioration, that's a mental health care power of attorney. And Arizona separated those powers basically not that long ago. So that's where, if you have an estate plan that is as little as 7 years old, 5 years old, that you might not actually have a mental health care power of attorney, because it didn't exist in Arizona as little as just a few years ago.
And that mental health power of attorney, what the family found out was required to hospitalize dad at an acute care behavioral health facility to get stabilized right. And they couldn't admit him without the mental health power of attorney being executed. He's now incapable of making that decision to self-admit. Now they're off to guardians court, right?
That's exactly it. And I've actually worked with a number of even assisted living centers and do education seminars there where, dad goes to assisted living center and does not have, he has the capability, he's still doing okay, but he's moved into an assisted living center. But then fast forward a few years and the sundowner syndrome starts kicking in. And with my grandma, we call it 3 o'clock because I didn't know about sundowner syndrome at the time.
Right.
And once he's no longer capable of signing new documents, that basically the only option is guardianship.
Yeah.
And that could have been prevented just with a basic review where, hey, Mr. Scott, it looks like here you've got everything else here. You've got your financial power of attorney that covers all your finances. You got your living will that then will help let the doctors and caretakers know what you want done and how you want treated. And you got your last will that takes care of where your stuff goes. But what you don't have is a mental health care power of attorney. And just for a simple review could have caught that.
Yeah.
And could have prevented the whole long, arduous court hearing, all of the headaches.
There's so many things as I engage the assisted living providers, the care homes, and the larger centers like that, Jason, simply by doing those reviews and then guide their residents to get some help proactively. The state doesn't require that the state requires that if powers of attorney are executed, they have to have them on file. But it doesn't mean that anybody's looked at them very closely or guided somebody to a professional like yourself to make sure that all the loops and gaps are maybe addressed. And so I wish more centers would take the opportunity to just quickly review them and get some help from somebody like yourself to prevent those issues from happening later.
Well, that's what we're here to do, is trying to educate, because people will have confusion where they think, oh, well, I had my last will.
Right.
So I've got everything I need, but that nowadays it's not just good enough to have just a last will.
Yep.
It's all the other facets. It's then even with the financial power of attorney, some people go, well, I've got so-and-so I've got my son on my bank account, so I don't need a financial power of attorney. But just even life, APS, your power bill, if you become incapacitated, you're in the hospital, APS doesn't have your son on the APS bill.
Yeah.
So that's where a financial power of attorney comes in. So there's a lot of extra facets people don't think about in regular everyday life.
Yeah. Can I ask?
Yep.
Let me ask you two questions then. With these different powers of attorney, people ask me at times, do I have to have them notarized? Is there a difference in who has to sign those or witness those or notarize the three different powers of attorney?
Actually, yes, they have different qualifications.
Okay.
So for example, I just got done having a situation that happened real recently with a financial power of attorney, where it was husband and wife. They kind of did a do-it-yourselfer, and what ended up happening was they didn't execute it properly. They had a notary stamp it, and a lot of people don't understand. In Arizona, a notary is not a witness, and a financial power of attorney requires a witness.
Okay.
And it was not properly executed, so they ended up then declining. And when their daughter went to go and help them into assisted living facility and sell their house, she found out the hard way that the document was enforceable, and ended up having to go to court to be able to allow her to sell her parents' house.
Oh man. With the and is the witness or notary requirement the same on the healthcare or mental health care powers of attorney?
So with the healthcare and mental health care, there's a different rule. There, you can have those require a notary, but not necessarily a witness.
Okay.
So you can have a witness, but usually a notary is good enough. Now, with the healthcare power of attorney, you can actually, even with some documents, it's allowable to have a witness for the document and still be valid. But those are those like little quirks. And then actually, if we go on to the next slide.
Gotcha. The worst case, the best and the worst case scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is first with the wills, I'll run into people that they'll go off and create their own will. And legally speaking, you can create your own will. You can create your own power of attorney. You could write up something on essentially a napkin, and it is technically legal, kind of like the next one, but it's all those things that you don't know, and I call it getting 90% of it done. Where some people, I've even had like a little while ago, he was an attorney. He was a retired attorney from New York, and he did some research. He went online. He moved here, him and his wife, from New York, and he basically had just a couple of questions, and essentially just wanted me to bless the will that it was good.
Okay.
I started reviewing it, and he had gotten most of it there and correct, but the things that were correct in New York, there's other things that he then didn't think about that apply in Arizona, or even other life events that you just don't think about.
Okay.
And when we got through with it, his wife ended up just telling him, all right, we're gonna end up having Jason put this together, because I want it done right the first time.
Yeah.
But I actually it was a husband and wife. They wrote up their wills on some stationery pad, and they were legal wills.
Yeah.
But they missed three little sentences. In those three little sentences, when they both passed away, their friend was the one who was supposed to be the agent, which in Arizona it's called a personal representative for the will.
Right.
And one of the things that was missed was this thing called a bond waiver. And it's a sentence, but that one sentence that was missed then required their beloved friend who was doing this for free to go off and find every single beneficiary, which one of them included people who owned a bunny, and that was the beneficiary, was the owners of Little Bunny Tutu. And to get a waiver to allow for this friend to basically be the official person to dole out everything for the estate. Mm-hmm. And we had to find people in Alaska. We had people that we had to find in Wisconsin.
Oh man.
And Maine. They had 13 different people that in organizations, and their friend, the personal representative, had to go find all of them to sign off on this waiver, or it then would have created it's called a bond. Right. Basically, it's a tax on the estate. All of that could have been avoided with just a couple extra sentences, but you don't know what you don't know.
I get it. But you know what? And I see it my side of this, the world with placement. Armed with a little information on the internet, everybody's an expert. So it causes a lot of problems. You mentioned a minute ago. You talk about that and what that all entails.
Oh, what was that, Scott? You broke up.
Sorry about that. I said you mentioned wills, and people often confuse the concept of living wills with, of course, their last will and testament. I moved to the next screen here. Do you want to talk a little bit about wills and get into that?
Yeah. Onto the key features. There are several things. One is it is frustrating that they're called the same thing, but they do very different things. So the will that most everybody knows about, I call the stuff will. So that's where I've now passed away, and where does my stuff go? And then there's what's called a living will.
Right.
And the living will, that actually is while you're still alive, and that deals with doctor's directives, which is also called an advanced life directive, that gives the medical providers guidance as to how you want your care to be if you can't communicate to them what's going on. So if you're in a coma, how do you want to be treated? That's a living will.
Like two feet or artificial respirators and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, it's all of those different features. Once you pass, that's a different that's the last will and testament, which that's what this slide goes on, which some of the other features a lot of people don't realize is that in a last will and testament, you can also nominate who's going to be your representative and manage your estate after you've passed.
Okay.
You can also nominate people who have, let's say that they have minor children. It's only in a will that you can actually nominate who's going to take care of your kids. So a lot of people will have, well, of course, I'm relatively young, so if my wife and I passed, well, it's going to be my parents that are going to take care of them.
Right.
Well, unless it's written down.
Kids were little. Right.
Yeah, unless that's written down, doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And when we get older, now we also have, if we have special needs children or people who are incapacitated as adults, a will also can nominate who takes care of them if you're not around anymore.
Gotcha. And I would bet you are seeing, I see a number of adult children, 50s and 60s, who for some reason, developmental disability, mental health issues, reasons, have always lived with mom and dad. Mom and dad are now in their 80s, and you're having to make arrangements for those older kids that can't manage life on their own, right? You're seeing what I probably see too.
Actually, yes. So actually I have a great scenario. Her name was Stella. Mm-hmm. And Stella, she was in assisted living, a group home, and she was 95 years old, and she had withered down to basically a stiff wind could just knock her right on over.
Mm-hmm.
And she was only sticking around because she was afraid of what would happen if she passed. She had nobody else to take care of her adult son, who Mike was 55, and Mike actually had a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike basically he was not the same ever since. And he basically, he was her main reason for existence.
Yep.
And we met, and it was specifically because of that, because she was actually even on hospice at the time.
Right.
And she was so worried about him. She wasn't even worried about herself. And we got all the ducks in a row and created documents, one of them being a will, that then nominated this other person to take care of Mike if she passed away.
Right.
And once she had those done, she now had peace of mind, and she finally was able to relax in her final time.
Yeah. These are complicated stories, but they're not so unusual. Anything else you want to talk about regarding will here?
Well, the basics that wills also help designate assets, as well as they help lock down what your wishes are.
Okay.
But they're not necessarily they don't necessarily have to be followed by your beneficiaries, which is what a lot of people think, that certain wishes sometimes is where other documents, which we'll go over those there in a little bit, what they can do. But basically, they just help determine who handles what.
Okay.
So yeah, on to the next slide. One of the some of the other pieces, which is that you can empower your personal representative to actually create a trust.
Okay.
And within your will. That's not common as much anymore, but it is kind of an interesting feature that you can kind of create a mini trust inside your will. And for some people, that's beneficial. Nowadays, it's usually you want to keep them clean and separate, just like powers of attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But then along with that and some other planning, you can actually often avoid or reduce the exposure to what people think of as probate. So yeah, on to the next one.
And that's where most people get excited. They want to, they're told at all points.
And that's what all the planning's about is.
And so under the powers of attorney, you asked the question.
A lot of people will go, well, like for example, Scott, you're married, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So then, there's a lot of people that are, well, why do I need a power of attorney? Because, isn't my wife going to be able to make decisions on my behalf? And that's true. There is a statutory, Arizona has if you don't have powers of attorney, we have an answer for you law.
Like a
but,
yeah.
Oh, the thing about that is that that there are still some headaches with that. That if even though that the law says who can step in if you don't have a power of attorney, okay, that let's say that then somebody else wants to step in as well. Well, now you have a problem.
And I imagine that comes up more often in times when you have a second marriage, and now you have who's got more to say about that, the wife of 10 years or the adult son who's 60, right?
That's common, but actually it's just as common where it is we've had a marriage for 15 years.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was now I'm now in a coma, and I told my wife what I wanted to be done, but my parents, my mom specifically, didn't have the same beliefs. And my mom comes in and says, no, Jason should have this type of treatment. And if I did not have a power of attorney empowering my wife,
Yep.
you've got yourself a mess.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that. Okay.
And that was a case in Florida, which is the Terry Schiavo case, where her husband said this is what Terry wanted, and her parents said, nope, we don't believe in that. And that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And by the time it got there, she'd passed away.
Yeah.
And that whole time she was on basically a prolonged, agonizing coma with basically respirators and all these things she didn't want.
Yep, I remember
that. And that thing that happened then, I was just at a seminar on Monday, and a hospice agent had 5 stories just like that.
Just unbelievable how much this stuff is real in our world. Let's get to the next slide here. I'm thinking we have about 5-8 more minutes, Jason. So I want to make sure we cover all the content you want us to know today. In the last slide, it mentions the concept of personal representative. You want to define that for us and go through that?
Yeah, basically just a personal representative is a person that's the agent in a will. And they're the ones that can typically do things on your behalf after you pass away. And they're the ones that take care of all those headaches. And it's not necessarily a gift that you're a personal representative. It's more like a do-good agency. So yeah, we can go on to the next one.
I've had adult kids say they really love their parents and wish they hadn't made them their personal representative in those situations.
Yeah, it is not.
Give me a lot. Yeah.
It is a. It is a what is that? A labor of love.
Yeah. Especially when
that it's much better just to be the beneficiary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's much better just to get the check at the end instead of doing all the work and maybe not even getting the check. Yeah. And then everybody questioning you. So yeah, well, one of the things though, to be cognizant of or be aware of, a lot of people we move from out of state, and the one thing that's really interesting about like the powers of attorney is that powers of attorney vary depending on the state. So when we end up having someone who moves from, we'll call it Wisconsin, and decides I'm going to call Arizona, because that happens every once in a while, right?
Right.
That basically their documents might not always translate to Arizona law.
Right.
And that's where having those reviews come in and are so important to avoid some of those things. Same thing with snowbirds that they call Arizona, home at some point, or even if people don't realize just owning property in another state or another country, like a timeshare in Canada.
Sure.
All those features are things that possibly your will or your power of attorney will not actually cover. You might need something else, especially if it's in another country. So yeah, going to the next one.
I make a comment, and everybody on my team does. If we're helping a family relocate a loved one to assisted living here, they're coming from California or another state, is that we plead with them to please have an attorney review mom and dad's life documents when they get here to make sure things are square.
Exactly.
Or execute a mental health because they probably don't have one, a mental health power.
Almost always, especially because there's very few other states that actually have that separate power, and that's usually numero uno.
Yeah.
So yeah, just as another aside, other kind of estate planning documents or tools there's trusts, but there's quite literally hundreds of types of trusts.
Okay.
And it is not a one size fits all, though the most common that people have is a revocable or a living trust that they put their house in. But there's no such thing as a bad or a good. It's more they're tools to address a specific situation for a specific person. So yeah, going on.
And this is the tool that people rely on to keep themselves out of that probate thing, right?
Yep. And actually, on the like flipping to the next slide, some of the key features of a trust is that one of the big things that most people have them for is to, almost in air quotes, avoid probate. The thing about that is that the key word is that the trust actually has to be properly funded.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that have had trusts made, especially in the 90s and mid 2000s,
right,
where they have what's called a pour over will, and the trust actually doesn't have anything in it right now. And in Arizona, if you have assets that have to go through a will, they're going to go through probate. So what you want to avoid probate is actually have your trust properly funded. Okay. And once that's done, you save time. The things get to your loved ones faster. You actually have ways that you can manage if you become incapacitated. There's tax savings, there's beneficiary, there's all kinds of amazing things that a trust can do.
Okay.
Not necessarily for everybody, but there's a lot of neat things. It's almost like a computer program.
So when someone comes to you and they may have had a trust drawn up in another state or at another time in their life, and you review these things, these are things that, Jason, you can check to make sure that it's funded right, and you're addressing that maybe an older trust may or may not address these key features of a current plan that you may help them upgrade or do something with to bring it up to speed.
Absolutely. I actually have a simple 3-step program where I send out a questionnaire, we meet, that we go over the basic questions, which then helps me understand what your goals are. And then from there, I review all the documents and make sure that your paperwork matches up with what your goals are today. So then on to the next section. Yeah, that's so then that's where some of these things I've touched several times, and it's one of those things where you got to say it several times, Scott, to get it into someone's thought pattern, which is document review. And that doesn't necessarily even mean things get changed. So you might move from another state and you might not need any changes in your trust or your will. But by having a review done, you actually now know, this is exactly what I still want, is what these documents are going to do. And then other documents or things that can also help are guardian conservatorship nominations. Like that would have helped out the people that you were talking about,
right?
Where it's a document that you nominate who's going to be your guardian or conservator if you become incapacitated. There's still a court process, but it streamlines it by actually knocking down and not having as much of a question as to who you want to take care of you if you become incapacitated.
Okay.
And then funeral, burial declarations and beneficiary deeds, living wills. We've kind of touched on some of that before, as well as VA and, like we talked about at the beginning with the book, the all-text planning.
Right.
These are all other things that people think when they just have a quote will, that there's a lot of other steps that can come in that can not necessarily all these are required for an individual, but they're all just different facets. It's kind of like an investment in the stock market. There's 100 different stocks out there, and some stocks are good for some people and some stocks are good for other people.
Right.
Same thing with estate planning.
Well, I would guess that, these are just things that as we age, I've been floored. I think I shared with you on a conversation a week or two ago that how many younger people, and I mean 45 to 60-year-old folks, which is those are my peers, I'm helping find assisted living care. And when they had their documents drawn up, they might were thinking that it was going to be their parents that needed help. It's now a number of people in my world that need help. So it's like, wow, you know what I mean? we got to be constantly be reviewing these things wherever you are on the journey, as my guess, right?
It is very true, because we never know. I mean, there's people who I'll meet, and they've had highly successful CEO level family members. Actually, I had somebody just a little bit ago that fell right in. He was 45, and he had a heart attack, and he had 3 young children, and the heart attack was his motivator. He made it through the heart attack. So then he met me. We got all of his ducks in a row. 6 months later, he had a stroke, and the stroke he did not make through.
Wow.
And that it just stuff happens. And actually, I've had other people where, someone who, she was 32 years old, riding a little scooter, like a Vespa type scooter, ran into a curb. She hit her hip on the scooter, and the ambulance people checked her out, sent her home. She ended up having internal bleeding and passed away. And that's just, she's 30 years old.
Yeah.
So that's, these things kind of happen. We kind of, I look at it as, it's like we're all driving down the freeway, going 100 miles an hour without a seatbelt or an airbag, and we don't realize it.
Can I ask you one more question here? If you have any suggestions for people in, the boomer age group that are trying to get mom and dad, who are, survivors of potentially the World War II or the Korean conflict, survivors of the Depression, very close to the vest, they keep everything private. How do you help them open their world up to make sure that as boomer kids, we can help our parents make sure that all those ducks in a row when they're resistant? Is there anything that you could share, help with that?
So this is, I don't know if you have the same situation, Scott, but I've had it personally, where when you go and talk to your parents, they don't listen to you. Yeah. You might be a highly successful, incredibly knowledgeable person, but my goodness, they don't listen to you at all.
Yeah.
And then some third party person, which often I'm that person, then talks maybe even the exact same thing that you talk to your parents about, and they open up, and now they understand what you were trying to explain to them is for their best benefit. And that's sometimes it's just bringing in a third party.
Okay.
It's sometimes actually the quickest and easiest.
Okay.
And it just opens their eyes, because I'm a big believer in communication. So that's where, what's the point of having a power of attorney if they don't know that they're your power of attorney?
Yeah.
So how can they step in? So then that's where I will have those meetings and say, so you want Scott to be your power of attorney? Okay. Does he know that? So, because if you just put this underneath the bed, when that time happens, when Scott needs to step in, he won't even know where to get the paperwork,
right?
Let alone he won't even know he has the job that you hired him for,
right?
Because you never told him. So then that's often part of the conversation that I'll have with people is communication.
Well, thank you for being committed to education. It's your work is totally in alignment with what we're hoping to do with Options, and bring these kinds of education opportunities to our listeners, to people that we work with, and then other opportunities, like I know you're doing one this week with the book over at a senior living community in North Scottsdale, and you and I have plans to do some things over on the west side together this year. So just grateful for you, and thank you. Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, Jason, where your offices are, and if you have a website or phone number that people have any questions, they can give you a call.
Absolutely. Actually, on this slide, I have 3 offices. One in Peoria, off of 83rd Avenue in Bell. One in Scottsdale, off of Scottsdale Road, Tacoma. Okay. And I have another one in Sun City West, off of R.H. Johnson and Meeker. But then I also, because of the type of situation business that we're in, Scott, that I travel as well. So if you can't come to me, then I come to you. And you can make appointments or schedule consultations or reviews. You can call my office at 480-360-0537, which should be on the next slide.
Oh, there you go. Got it.
And then so a West Valley number as well, which is the 623-236-2476. And you can also visit us on our website at the letter G, number 2, law.com.
Awesome. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the conversation. You and I could talk for 3 hours and we could just blow through all kinds of time, but I'm grateful for your afternoon and joining us. And you guys, please reach out to Jason if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns. Man, he's just, his commitment is to give people the right information, the right answers. And thanks for your participation today, Jason. Grateful for you.
You're very welcome, Scott. And actually, I'll toss this in for your group. I will do a free, if they mention this video, I'll do a free review and educate them on what they have. So they got to mention the video, but I will do that as a Scott special.
You're awesome. Thanks, man. I'll be in touch. You guys have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again. Julia, let everybody know when our next event's going to be. She'll tell me, I'll show up.
That's right. I'm in charge.
All right, y'all. Have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.